My grandparents both came to New York in the 1920s. They met in New York in 1921. My grandparents married quickly after they met, and they set an entire family in East Harlem.
We're in East Harlem. Now we're on the northern eastern part of East Harlem, 405 East 105th Street. When these housing projects first opened up, we were among the first families to live here. We moved from an apartment building to a housing authority project, and everyone wanted to live in a project. And it looked pretty much the same as it did when we first moved here, except we didn't have all of these doors. It was open corridors and an open area, and we didn't have these fancy gates. And I lived on the second floor, and I spent many a wonderful years in this development.
I have an experience as an adult that someone had asked me, was I afraid being raised in East Harlem? And I can tell you honestly, I was never afraid. I felt very protected. I could not walk a block 10 feet without someone knowing who I was, looking, after me. And I had a real sense of security. It was only when I would go outside of East Harlem that I felt fear, because that was not as familiar. And those were my teenage years. But I never felt afraid in East Harlem.
So 103rd and Lexington, number 6 train. Part of my life, for most of my life, but as a teenager and as a youngster, for more than 25 years, this was my train stop.
I think culture and heritage is so foundational for so many of us. And then when you tap it, you get the richness. I think the sense of family, the depth of family may be a distinction. The depth of faith may be another distinction. The music, just the love of music. That music is parts of your joy and your sorrow, your love and your happiness.
We're on 111th Street between Lexington and Park, literally in front of the building where my grandparents arrived in 1921 and where they married and lived and raised their children. My mother was born. It was not this building, it was tenements in those days. The entire block was tenements. My godfather owned a candy store down the corner. My aunts lived across the street. My great aunts and my cousins all lived across the street. Those were all tenements. So I lived in a very small town. In a 3-block radius, everyone I knew and loved lived. Very protected, very sheltered. It was the best childhood ever.
The next place we're going to go is I'm going to end up in my school. But before that, I wanted to show you 96th Street, where I lived as an adult. We first started out on 105th Street. I didn't leave East Harlem for too long. So 153 East 96th Street is where I lived many years with my husband Louis. And then we spent a good 15 years here with about another 5 years at 105th Street. This is my elementary school. I spent 8 glorious years here. This taught me how to love reading. It taught me how to master politics. It taught me fundraising. It also taught me about theater and arts. We had a great theater program, which they said I used to orchestrate too much and tell people what role they had to do. I loved the principal, Sister Kathleen. She loved me. We spent a lot of time together. And it was great. This was the boys' entrance, and the girls' entrance was on the other side. This street was literally our playground. They would close it off. My aunt lived right here, and she would pick me up after school, and my sister, and then we would go home to 113th Street, which is how we did things. Looks a little different than it did then. The buildings are in much better shape than they were then. If I were to think of the traditions that my grandmother passed down to all of us and that she got from her mother, my great grandmother, were service. Were people, community service, helping neighbors. My grandmother was a union organizer, which I've said before. My mother was a community organizer. She worked for something called the CCD in East Harlem, was community something development. She went on to work for Union Settlement, but that was a job. But again, the sense of service and commitment. This is St. Paul's Church. This is the church where I was baptized, I made my communion, I had my confirmation here, I was married here. This is my entire Catholic upbringing and foundation. Everything in our family we did in large numbers. It was included a grandparent, great aunts, cousins, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins. We never knew the distinction. It was your aunt or your uncle or your cousins. My favorite thing about being Puerto Rican is being Puerto Rican. You have the best of all worlds. You have the Caribbean infused with some Native American cultures and traditions, African American traditions. You have a great sense of pride, a resiliency. I can't think of anything that doesn't make me proud about being Puerto Rican. And then being a Puerto Rican raised in New York, I had the best of all worlds. Thank you for celebrating Hispanic heritage. I love all cultural celebrations where we give tribute to not only who we are, but where we came from. It was a joy to be able to go through East Harlem and have some wonderful memories of a great background and a wonderful history. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. Have a great, great celebration.